Welcome to our panel. In this panel, we are going to talk about the Egyptian revolution and social dynamics. Our panelist, Salih Zamani, PhD candidate from University of Brussels, and the other panelist is Önder Canveren, associated Önder Canveren, PhD candidate, is from 9 Eylül University. Okay. At first, we will start with our first panelist, Salih Zamani. Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and you for attending to this panel. The aim of my paper is a structural analysis of a state breakdown in Egypt. As you know, we witnessed some chain of overthrowing of dictator ruler during some years ago. And I start my article with a main question. This is not a new question in literature of political science and political sociology. This is it has been existed from French Revolution up to now, but the answers are different. How and why Mubarak regime or some other regimes became vulnerable? Because of this, we have to focus on the nature of answers, and we have to focus on the literature. The main responses to the questions can be summarized in two channels: socioeconomic and political literature. There is a rich body of literature tracing the Arab Spring and uprising in Egypt a few years ago. The main responses to this question would be traced in socioeconomic and political factors. As you see in this slide, the rise of unemployment, poverty, inflation, rising social inequality, rentierism, extension of patronage network, and etc. belong to the socioeconomic analysis. And also in political analysis, we see some factors as emergency law and the prohibition on political rights and civil freedoms and lack of free and fair election, police brutality against activists, the widespread corruption, the spread of virtual opposition through social networking websites, and etc. I summarized my model into this cube. As you see in this slide, for going toward an integrated approach, for combination of all of this literature to one integrated approach, I try to combine rentierism in a one dimension of this cube. Another dimension is about the type of state, and other one is the role of superpower. These are three hypotheses. In other words, the structural preconditions of political vulnerability will be considered. These preconditions consist of three main hypotheses, and each one explains a part of vulnerability background. First hypothesis is related to the nature of a state in general, and the nature of sultanistic and personal regimes in particular. This section discusses the most important dimensions of sultanism and can complement the first hypothesis that sultanistic regimes are the most vulnerable regimes in the Middle East. The second hypothesis discusses the rentier state theory as an aspect of sultanistic regimes. Although the rentier state is not necessarily non-democratic or authoritarian, but the nature of a state in Middle Eastern countries show a positive relation between regime types and rentierism. The main question is that how rentierism can make the state vulnerable and prepare the ground for transition. The third hypothesis concentrates on the role of superpowers and international pressure in state vulnerability. as I said before, that is to say that the combination of these structural factors are the most powerful tools which cover the aim of this paper. About sultanism, the roots of this expression is in the three types of authority in Weber literature. As you know, Weber distinguished three types of authority: rational authority, charismatic authority, and patrimonialism authority. Sultanism is a kind of patrimonial authority. According to Weber, authority will be called traditional if legitimacy is claimed for it and believed in by virtue of the sanctity of age-old rule and powers. And what is the main sultanistic feature at all? Personal rulership, mixed private and public affairs, the familial power and dynastic succession, no distinction between state career and personal service to the ruler, the lack of rationalized impersonal ideology, the ruler act only according to his own unchecked discretion, no rule of law with law institutionalization, the mixture of fear and rewards and loyalty to ruler. About rentierism, the main question in this section is how and by which mechanism can rent make the, in other words, non-democratic state vulnerable. Firstly, we need a definition from rentierism or rentier states, which are defined as those countries that receive on a regular basis substantial amount of external rent. Here, I can mention two types of state. As oil revenue accrued from abroad, the state is relieved of the burden of taxation. In turn, the primary function of the state becomes distribution or allocation rather than extraction. The state then utilizes the distributive function as a potential source of legitimacy. Distribution relieves the state of the political accountability that accompanies taxation. This is a famous quote that say no representation without taxation, that I will explain later on. And these regimes going to be vulnerable through these two outcomes or through these two mechanisms. No representation without taxation and patron-client relationship or clientelism. The first outcome is the state gaining autonomy from society and the loss of need for domestic revenue and ultimately the lack of representation. In other words, the lack of taxation and fragility in the state representation creates vulnerability with the smallest crisis in rent seeking and cycles of revenue. The relation between rent, state autonomy, lack of taxation and representation are the unsecure cycle for rentier regime, which are mostly non-democratic. And the second outcome is consideration of patron-client relationship, which makes them both competent in making the state vulnerable. Clientelism is a type of mutual political relation which is based on material reward, such as loan, fund, increasing wage, and etc., or non-material rewards such as job, official position, administration, promotion, and etc. The best term I can call it as a political bargain between ruler and ruled. And patronage system is the main obstacle in front of formation extreme opposition. Neutralization of opposition is achieved through repression or through continuity of buying off and patronage system. And the last one is the role of superpowers. By this question that how can superpowers accelerate the process of vulnerability? There is some kind of ways that I can mention. Context of as a whole, context of Cold War and international competition, our dependence on the U.S., especially as one of the most important superpower in the region, especially after the collapse of Soviet Union. Our identification of the executive with U.S. aid irritates feeling of nationalism among the elite. While the U.S. seeks to increase the dependence on foreign executive on U.S. aid, it seeks to impose domestic policies which weaken the executive limits on coercion, greater political expression for professional elites and skilled worker, meaningful election, restriction on corruption. I passed from my theoretical framework to some historical fact. If we want to have a short glance to the post-1952 era after revolution or coup, we can see some major event establish a strong and powerful state by Nasser, and also his strategy, nationalization and industrializations, Arab-Israel War 1967, and open door policy or Infitah, and Camp David Accord and the peace treaty with Israel in the Sadat era. But there is some point here that less than 10 years after the coup of 1952, the new regime adopted a new ideology, socialism or Arab socialism, and accordingly nationalized most of the economic wealth. The state became the only provider of public service. The state tightly monopolized political power, controlled economic wealth, and supervised information and opinion. In other words, there emerged a paternalistic state taking care of the individual from cradle to grave. This strong state did not lack legitimacy or popular support. It had proved its credentials by scoring a few spectacular success, in particular in Suez Canal nationalization, and then aborting the Suez campaign by the long-hated colonial power Britain and the no-less-hated ally Israel. Sadat, this about the open door policy. Sadat launched his open door policies after 1973 war with Israel and regaining of Sinai Peninsula. The Infitah or open door policy in 1974 and peace treaty with Israel were the most important headlines in Sadat era. But we can see also to another dimension of ODP or Infitah, foreign investment, social prosperity, extension of financial institution and free market were the most crucial pillars of ODP. Although ODP as a liberal approach had hopes for opening and improvement, it was not successful in practice. A statist economy was too extended that he could not implement the ODP program. The result was clear, and an important oriented economy with a stagnating domestic production. This is the main idea of Sadat for Infitah: Arab capital plus Western technology plus abundant Egyptian resource equal development and progress. This is his idea for starting his economic strategy. After this era, this is the political dimension of Mubarak regimes. If I would summarize the most important factors in dimension of political. I would say non-democratic elections, extension of distributive policies for rent-seeking situation, emergency law, personal and family intervention in politics, and economy. Because, you know, in non-democratic election, you will see something paradoxical, because maybe in reality there is no non-democratic election. But here, because of repression and fraud and using semi-legal tools such as multi-phases and vote buying and managing electoral policies, we can say non-democratic election. Extension of distributive policies for rent-seeking situation. Election in Egypt served as an important device for the distribution of rent and promotion to important groups within Egypt's politically influential classes, including family heads, businessmen, and etc. And about the emergency law and the number of related military decrees together give the authority for reaching power to arbitrarily and systematically curb human rights and fundamental freedom in the name of national security. Arbitrary arrest on the grounds of upholding national security and public order, prolonged detentions, far-reaching media censorship, prohibition of strike, demonstration and electoral campaigns, the use of violence against people who are peacefully exercising their constitutional right, and the referral of civilian cases to military courts are just a few of far-reaching powers that the authority can exercise with impunity. According to human rights group, the state holds at least 10,000 people detained without charge on the basis of emergency law. And about the personal and family intervention in politics and economy, we can see a variety statistical evidence about these factors. According to Goldstone, Mubarak and his family reportedly built up a fortune of between 40 billion and 7 billion, and 14 official and businessmen close to Mubarak's son Jamal are alleged to have made fortune averaging more than 1 billion each. And the next slide describes the governance indicator from 1996 to 2011, which is extracted from worldwide governance indicator about voice and accountability, political stability and absence of violence, government effectiveness, regulatory quality, rule of law, control of corruption. As you see in this table, from 2005, the shadow cells, to 2011, we will see the crisis in the governance indicator. The other dimension is economic and social dimension of Mubarak regime, the open door policy toward productions. This is the strategy of Mubarak. The Mubarak regime rebranded the economic reform process, the open door policy. While the commitment was made in favor of the ODP, Mubarak could not afford to move quickly in this direction. Despite the Sadat era Infetah process, the public sector was still large. In contrast, the private sector was small and weak. After short periods of economic growth in 1985, oil price dropped sharply, and consequently worker remittances and Suez transfer met the first fiscal crisis. It means that state revenue decrease and state must offset it by taxation or reducing the expenditure by decrease of subsidies. This is a famous puzzle and painful situation of each authoritarian rentier regime, because they do not have any choices. Unsuccessful negotiation with IMF and the ZAP program is a special program for a structural adjustment program for International Monetary Fund in order to reduce expenditure and extracts of private sector led to printing money for neutralizing of balance of payment deficit that soon after inflation increased. May 1991, Egypt signed an agreement with the World Bank and IMF. This time around, Egypt began a serious attempt to implement the program with close monitoring by the IMF. Inflation was brought under control by tightening fiscal and monetary policies from 21% just before the reform period. The consumer price index was brought down to 7% by 1996. Although some indicators such as inflation rate change and stabilized rate or currencies, but unemployment, poverty, and inequality increased. Economic liberalization did not usher in a competitive, productive economy. It actually created monopolies. The owners of these new enterprises, being well connected to the regime, found all kinds of ways to get around paying tax and got away with it. In other words, selective economic liberalization served to stabilize the regime in various ways. First, by keeping untouched political sensitive economic sector. Selective economic reforms did not harm the interest of the established ruling elite, thus preserving the privileged position of many regime supporters, such as the military. Second, given the gradual pace of reforms, the negative social effects generally associated with full-scale neoliberal economic reform were at least initially mitigated. Third, while retaining control over a strategic economic sector, the regime used economic liberalization to redistribute privilege to regime supporters and co-opt important segment of the private sector, thus reinforcing its social basis. The important point of this argument is that Egypt's economy mostly affected with the decrease and increase of rent resources rather than SAP and IMF program. You can see in this table the main phases of Egypt economy from 1961 to 2011. I distinguish 6 phases by the GDP per capita percentage and GDP gross annual and the percentage of rent in the share of rent in the percentage of GDP. You can see here relatively there is a significant correlation between rent and economic crisis. In fact, state resources did not increase through SAP program. Why? The rent resources supplied it. The most crucial rent resources in Egypt are natural resources, worker remittances, and tourism. Political and strategic aid, as well as Suez revenue, are other rent resources which have low share. The role of superpower in Mubarak regime. The main idea in this part is the situation of dependency. Here, if there is a dependency to the superpower, it can be provide a ground for vulnerability. I can mention two main tools for this relation between superpower and regimes. By receiving broad strategic, economic, and military aid from U.S., receiving political and economic pressure from change. The aid, among of many economic aids through last 5 decades, Egypt have received non-economic advices from his external ally. The U.S. pressure for promotion of democracy, mainly after 11 September, Obama's famous lecture in Cairo led to holding the first multi-party election in Egypt. He clearly mentioned the importance of democracy, rule of law, transparency, and equal administration of justice. Although Mubarak was resisting to these ideas for keeping his relation with international patronage had to exercise some change. A range of political and economic dependency to the US shows that a state will encounter vulnerability if superpowers decrease their support. Mubarak, due to his sultanistic nature of a state, could not continue without external support. However, he sought to be compatible with US policies in the region. This paper has considered to the, at the conclusion, this paper has considered to the structural preconditions of a state breakdown in Egypt, evaluation and composition of nature of state, socioeconomic policies in terms of frontier state, as well as external pressures, demonstration that Mubarak regime has been encountered with vulnerability. He was a heir of authoritarian state, which lacked the elements of democratic state. Gradually, during 3 decades, he became from an authoritarian president to a sultan. Especially after 2005, transformation of his regime into the extreme authoritarianism started with the 3rd decade of his rule and accelerated in 2010 by parliamentary election. I can mention to the rule of elite circle and their competition for approaching to Mubarak, president of Jamal, the rumor of presidency of Jamal Mubarak, his power and his power vote buying, widespreading repression are the main actions that he did for this power. Economically, in spite of periods of economic growth, he could not decrease the rate of poverty and unemployment. Even IMF program merely amplified its supervision on some economic mechanism and could not increase domestic production and economic resources. Egypt's economy annually received around 20% share of GDP from rent resource. That is to say that Egypt's economy was semi-rentier. Not only semi-rentier, but also suffered from corruption, network of ruling elite abuse, and dependent businessmen. Rent resources were expensed in terms of high infrastructural power and penetration on patronage network instead of loyalty for consolidation of regime. Dependency to political, financial, and strategic aid of external power demonstrates that decrease in support is equal of crisis and vulnerability. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zamani, for your presentation. Now our other panelist, Mr. Jamberan, is going to talk about Police Academy inside story, security and foreign policy in the eyes of Egyptian university students. Yes, Mr. Jamberan.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Elhamdülillahi Rabbil alemin. Ve salatu ve selamu ala Resulina ve nebiyina Muhammed. Sulhun hayrun sadakallahu yazim. Dear Mr. Chair and ladies and gentlemen, believe me, you will get bored of this presentation after this remarkable one by our Iranian colleague. Discuss the main motivations of the state breakdown in 2011 in Egypt. And this is a short story of a MA thesis written in Egypt after the Arab Spring Tahrir Revolution. We will have a lot of graphs and statistics and percentages to exploit the perception of foreign and security policy on the eyes of Egyptian university students. I still have this question, which tense should I use, the past one or the present one, because Egyptian politics has changed dramatically due to this coup d'etat by General Sisi. And what I have written for my thesis is not updated, unfortunately, but we still have significant signals from the public opinion on foreign and security policy of Egypt. But this is one of the main challenges of the article. Just a brief theoretical framework on public opinion and international relations when you consider two main branch or school of ayartıyor, realism and liberalism in a short way. Realism don't attach any significance to public opinion because for them states are rational and neither public opinion nor leadership matters in foreign policy decision-making process, because what is supposed to do is just to make cost-benefit calculation. But when it comes to this liberal theory, liberal school, according to them, there is a place of public opinion for foreign policy and policymakers, and they have two approaches on that. This bottom-up approach that public can canalize foreign policy decision makers on a specific topics. Bosnian crisis can be given an example how Muslim communities pressured on their government to do something against the massacre and the genocide. And we also have this top-down approach that politicians in a democratic country should care of the public opinion because they will go to the next election and any wrongdoings in foreign and security policy will get them out from the power. This is the case, for instance, in the USA. Bush administration had to convince the public that they should go to war against Afghanistan and Iraq. Same true today in Turkey. And of course we have this democratic peace theory that democracies cannot fight with each other due to the public opinion. The main assumption for our study was that Egypt is in transformation after the Tahrir revolution, and public opinion will be considered by the new government. But the assumption at the moment is failed because we again have this one-man regime by General Sisi. We had 72 questions in our survey, and some of them were nominal, some ordinal and ratio. And the sample was more than 500, but we had to delete some of them due to the manipulation. Some was conducted by face-to-face and some via internet. And we had 10 sections, and we will discuss them into details. The first chapter is to measure their perception on the Arab Spring. They were more optimistic for the future of the Arab world and Egypt in general. The percentage was almost 40 when you look at the second line. And similar to the main trend, for them Arab Spring was a kind of a movement by ordinary people seeking for freedom, dignity and a better life, which was more than 60%. But they confused the role of the military during that time on the future of the Egypt. Some were more pro, some were against. According to Egyptian students, it is Turkey that played the most constructive role during the Arab Spring and after the removal of the Mubarak regime, like 46%. And then the USA and China are following countries. Normally we had more than 10 countries as option. According to Egyptian university students, it is security and the economy that are the most important concern of Egyptian domestic policy, which has a parallelness with our colleague on the issue of economy and corruption and business activities during Mubarak regime. Again, the most important concern of Egyptian foreign policy is the Western powers, this dependency theory. And interestingly, this water dispute among North African states, the Nile question is also the second most important concern for them. Pan-Arabism is the strategy that they support for the new government, that Egypt should make alliance with the Arab countries to deal with those challenges. interestingly, although they don't have this ethnic minority inside of Egypt, they feel that they have the risk of being divided, might be because of this Christian minority inside of the country. Yes, this is one of the main conclusions. Erdogan was the winner of the Arab Spring in the eyes of the Egyptian students. And also Turkey was considered to be a kind of model that Egypt may consider for them. And the percentage was much more than 70%, which was higher than Turkey as a model. I mean, leadership is more attractive on the eyes of Egyptians compared to the system of Turkey. Yes, they are pro-Enver Sedat. Mısır'a bölüm ve ahiren Egypt first and forever is a slogan that they really internalized. For them, Egypt should make decision which is good for just Egypt, neither Muslim world nor Arabs, nor the world more than 70%. When they consider the historical figures, Enver Sedat, Hassan el-Benna, and Jamal Abdel Nasser are the figures they admired most in history. And it was the military and religious institutions they trust at most during that time, but I'm sure this has changed dramatically because of the coup d'etat. And of course, the Islamic Party is the majority they were looking for the vote. We had this regression and correlation analysis whether Turkey could be a model or not. The result was Turkey is a model on the eyes of the Egyptians as a whole. We had a sub-question, why Turkey can be a model or why not, according to their answer, and Turkey can be a model because of its democratic regime. They consider Turkey as a democratic, not a country of democratization. And why not? Because of secularism and not Muslim enough in the eyes of Egyptian students. Yes, all attempts by the Obama administration failed to change the attitudes on the USA and US foreign and security policy in the region. Anti-Americanism is high among the Egyptian university students. And the main reason, of course, America's ties with Israel. Another chapter was on Iran. The question was to measure their perception of Iran in nuclear enrichment. According to them, Iran is in a way of owning nuclear weapons of mass destruction at the end of this enrichment. And they recommend their leaders to own also a nuclear enrichment to balance Iranian influence in the region, and they confuse whether a nuclear Iran will be a positive or negative thing for the Middle East. They confused. And of course they support a nuclear Egypt too, which is in parallel with their statement by the diplomats in International Atomic Energy Agency. Yes, this Arab-Israeli conflicts, we had more than 7 or 8 questions. They are quite pessimistic on a final peace among Israel and Palestinians. Just 42% said that the peace will never, because Israel will never give up occupied territories. When we look at the time of a final peace, 70% just consider that it will take more time to have a final peaceful solution. And when we look at the third question, they also say that the conflict will continue much longer than we wish at the moment for a final solution. And also, the new Israeli-Arab war is the instrument they consider to be functional against the Israeli occupation and Palestinian question. For them, there will be a peace at the end of a new Israeli-Arab war. They are quite sensitive on the Arab sovereignty over East Jerusalem and also the right of refugees to turn back their homeland, Palestine. When we ask the question about Egyptian-Israeli agreement sign up during the era of Anwar Sadat, and it is really interesting that they don't prefer a cancel of the treaty, but a modification of the treaty, which is around 61%. When we ask the question, what if Israeli and Palestinians come to an agreement, almost same, around 60% again say modification of the treaty, which means that it's not anymore a cold peace between Israeli and Egyptians. At least new generation in Egypt accept a peace and coexistence of Egypt and Israel together in the region, but they ask for reformation of the content of the peace treaty. Another chapter was global world. China is a rising power in Africa, and it is not different in Egyptian case. They want China to be the superpower, next superpower. Interestingly, Pakistan around 20%, because this Islamic idealism that one of the Muslim country could become a superpower one day. They admire it most again to President Erdogan of Turkey, and then King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia, just around 5%. When we look at this European countries, they have similar percentage like Germany, Great Britain, France, and the USA, but German soft power is much more than other powers in Europe and in the West, which is interesting, but in parallel with the literature in general, which should be detailed in much more why Germany. When we ask Gulf states, it is the Emirates that have more attraction because they have a significant number of immigrants working in the Emirates and sending dollars or German marks to their own homeland and family. This should be the reason. They don't trust neither Arab League or Organization of the Islamic Cooperation, but they trust at most the European Union, which means the EU still has credibility for this neighborhood policy in the Middle East and North Africa, which should be detailed again. Why not Arab League and Islamic Cooperation, but European Union? Another chapter was on the Middle East. According to them, the basic problem are two. The first one is the influence of the West, and the second one is the Israeli-Arab conflict. They believe that Turkey will be the best economy after 20 years. It was actually interesting. I didn't add Egypt into the list, but when we had this pilot cases, students were writing Egypt by their hand, and so we had to add this outside Egypt. So it was Turkey considered to be the best economy in the region. Of course, their enemy as usual didn't change. Israel, 64%, and 30%, of course, the USA. They don't share this threat perception as as observable in the Gulf state among Iran, it is just 6%. Might be a geographically different location. Yes, these were all on the findings of this survey study. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Canberra, for your presentation. Now we can take your questions if you have any to our panelists. Yeah, any question?
Is it which of the following countries, when you say which of the following countries, do you only list these 4 countries?
No, it is the countries that come out. Like they had the option of more than 10 countries, but the rest were just 1%, 2%, which means statistically insignificant, so you shouldn't put them into the graphs. But they had much more than the countries listed in the graph.
Were they mainly Arabic or countries from Europe?
No, like we divided, there was a category of European countries and it was Germany. There was a category of superpower, it was China. There was a category of Arab countries and it was Emirates. Yeah.
Okay. Any other question? Okay, so thank you for your attendance.